Good morning. My name is Samantha Taylor, and this is my video to go over my first teaching in practice activity. For this activity, I would be teaching like when to use the past tense or like simple past, present, and simple future. And so I've kind of mapped out a whole lesson plan that I'll go over and a little bit of my rationale as to how it's based on social constructivism principles. So for the lesson, I would be teaching the ESL class at the middle school I work at. So this class would probably have around 10 students. They're mostly beginners. There's a couple of students who are at the very, very beginning of their English journey. They've been just learning English for a few months. And then I also have students in the same class who have been learning English for a little over a year, some of them getting closer to 2 years. So there's a range of language abilities in the room, but I'm hoping that with appropriate scaffolding, I'd be able to, that all students would be able to complete this lesson successfully. Anyway, so to start, I always have a warm up and introduction on the board. So we're just coming out of fall break. So my question might be like, what did you do this week, or what did you do over fall break? And as students are answering, I would be kind of keeping a tally of all the verbs that they used on the board, keeping them probably in two separate lists, with one list being regular verbs and one being irregular verbs. So after some discussion, just practicing our speaking skills and getting used to each other, we would move into the lesson part, the mini lesson, where we're talking about tense. So I would kind of explain what tense was, explain how we have like a past tense, a present tense, and a future tense, and then using those verbs that they used in their discussion question at the beginning of class, I would start breaking down, conjugating them, showing them how a regular verb would look in the past, present, and future, show them what some irregular verbs that are more like high usage would look like. This would be very like discussion based. I would try and let some students kind of practice in like a discussion form, like, so what would the future tense look like here with this verb, and have students like kind of raise their hands and give answers in a more traditional lesson sense. And then we would move on to the guided practice. So with the guided practice, I would split students into groups, and they would be able to pick a famous person to research for this, which would help get some reading into this activity. But so they would read about a famous person, and then they would have to create a timeline of that person's life. And I gave like kind of an example of what one would look like using Taylor Swift. And then they would have to kind of draw out the timeline, make it pretty, make it neat. They would need to find 3 things that happened to the person in the past to practice using the past tense, 3 things that are happening right now for practicing that present tense, and 3 things that they think will be happening, because obviously this wouldn't, future tense are talking about things that haven't happened yet, just to practice using that verb form. And if there's time, I would have students kind of present their work to the class and be able to practice speaking using those terms in front of everybody. So once we've done this practice, I would be like moving around the room and helping. I would have students in like heterogeneous groups so that higher students could help the students with lower language ability. But once we've practiced it all together in this activity, then the like exit ticket assessment would be students creating just a timeline of their day or maybe their week, using events from their own life where they're going to practice using those verbs in the different tenses. So this would be like one from my day, just like really simple. So for my rationale, again, this is supposed to be based on some social constructivist principles. So the first principle is just that importance of social interaction and cooperative learning. So as much as possible, I'm going to try and incorporate group work, partner work during the independent, like the lesson part of the day. Then I could utilize some like think, pair, share, have students turn and talk to their partner to answer a question, that sort of thing. The guided practice is definitely heavy in the collaboration. Students are going to have to work together to create a product. I've had success with group work when I kind of like elect a group leader and say like, hey, you're in charge of making sure this gets done. Or with a different activity, I might assign each student a role within the group, like you're in charge of taking notes, writing things down, you're in charge of reading the material out loud, you're in charge of asking questions, making sure people stay on task, that sort of thing. But social constructivist principle says that students learn best when there's like social interaction, cooperation, collaboration. And so I tried to lean heavily on that in the lesson. Next, I tried to use some scaffolding techniques that are based on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So I followed the like I do, we do, you do approach, the I do being the little mini lesson at the beginning with lots of group discussion. The we do being the task that students have to do where they're creating their timeline of a famous person, they're working together to create this final product. And the you do being the exit ticket at the end where they have to apply those concepts using like their own life to create just like a mini timeline using the correct verb forms. So starting with modeling, having students work together with also me being just available to help with whatever they need to help them be able to successfully complete the project. And then lastly, they do have an independent, can I do this by myself kind of activity. And the last thing that not necessarily is present in the wording of the lesson plan, but is just something I'm going to try to implement more into my teaching style is this idea of dynamic assessment that we talked about last week, where I'm not going to just sit at my desk and let students work by themselves and just try to hopefully figure it out on their own, but just as I'm teaching the mini lesson, as I'm walking around the room during the group activity, just constantly be listening and assessing and trying to figure out what students are ready to do on their own, what supports they might need, or what supports might be needed to take away. How can I make this activity meaningful and beneficial for every student in the room, no matter where they are in their language learning journey? And I also noted that the independent activity isn't supposed to be a sign that learning is over. It's rather just for me to continue to assess where they're at, what they need. Do I need to reteach this, re-go over this? Are they ready to try this in a more advanced setting where they have to read more, have to write more, have to produce more language? But just the idea that we're constantly assessing, we're constantly learning. Instruction and assessment need to be integrated together to help support student learning. But that's kind of my lesson. So the three kind of parts of the social constructivism that I'm drawing from are the idea of social interaction, collaboration, trying to use scaffolding, thinking about the zone of proximal development, and then also trying to think about dynamic assessment as I'm teaching this lesson. I would think this would take probably at least an hour. Potentially, if I do more with it, I could stretch it out to a full 90 minutes. Especially if we add in like that presentation part of the guided practice, which is about how long the blocks are at my middle school. So that would honestly even be better. But yeah, this is my teaching in practice. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone else's teaching in practice and getting to learn from y'all and see what your ideas are for teaching. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed.